Hello everybody and welcome back to the course in this week. In the last few weeks you've learned several problem analysis techniques. Do you remember how we made an actor analysis and defined a problem statement? We made a goal tree and constructed a causal diagram. You've learned to apply these techniques and you've learned their do's and don'ts. But how are these methods related and how can they help to get a complete overview of a complex problem? Combining all your analysis in one overview is a problem diagram. It is a good way to quickly show what the problem is about, who are involved, where the dilemmas are, and what the possibilities are for making changes in the system you study. A problem diagram is therefore also a very powerful communication tool and can be used as a basis for discussion with the involved actors. This video will first show you how to make such a problem diagram. The second part of the video shows you how to identify and categorize alternatives while generating the problem diagram. Let's go back to all analysis we performed over the last weeks. We started our problem analysis with an analysis of the problem owner and the other involved actors. By talking to them and asking them many questions, we were able to construct problem statements for all parties. By constantly asking the why question, we were able to extract the main goals for all stakeholders. With the help of these main goals, we were able to make goal trees for all actors by constantly asking the what is this question. At the bottom of these goal trees, we found the criteria on the basis of which all alternatives can be compared to each other. Combining all criteria from the different actors involved provided us with a well-balanced set of criteria. As the criteria represent those elements in the problem field that our problem owner and the stakeholders find important, it became very interesting to know what factors influence the criteria. Therefore, we made the problem field, our system under study, explicit by representing it in relevant factors, in a causal diagram. After creating this diagram, we noticed that some of the factors were influencing other factors in the system, but were not influenced by anything themselves. So there was nothing the problem owner, or maybe even any of the other actors involved, could do to change them. These factors only have output and no input. We call these external factors. They are an important source of uncertainty for our problem owner and should be taken very seriously. We will deal with these uncertainties in our scenario analysis. The diagram that we have created defines the problem area. We can now start thinking about possible alternatives to influence the outcomes. In other words, what actions can an actor take that influence the system behavior such that the criteria will change in the desired direction? Adding possible alternatives to the diagram is very useful because it shows the client and stakeholders explicitly how the alternatives influence the causally related factors. What we have created now is a problem diagram. If well constructed, it contains all the basic elements actors need to know about the problem. This diagram is, therefore, a very powerful communication tool. The next part of this video will guide you through the generation of potential solutions for the problem. As we don't know yet if the actions we identify will be really solutions, as we have not yet analyzed them in detail, we prefer to call them alternatives. Do you remember the example of student Koen, who was throwing a party in his house? Imagine that Koen has made a problem diagram to represent the problem of how he can throw the most legendary party without causing too much nuisance. This is how a very much simplified version of such a problem diagram could look like. Obviously, this is a very basic diagram, with only two criteria, two external factors, and only 5 other factors. Also, the causal relations imply that Koen's friends are very simple people who are only satisfied when they drink a lot in a noisy environment. But for this instruction, this diagram will do. When we look for alternatives for Koen's problem, we are looking for everything that is capable of changing the numerical value of the criteria. Every action that influences one of the factors in the diagram, no matter how small, also influences the criteria. And when these actions do that, they can be a potential solution or partial solution to the problem. In other words, they are an alternative. This means that in this case, Koen must ask himself the question, how can I change the amount of guests, the attention on Facebook, the number of consumed beverages, the number of drunk guests, the inside noise level, or how to directly change the number of satisfied guests or the outside noise level. The possible answers to these questions are the many alternatives for solving the problem at hand. What would you do if you were Koen? Possible alternatives that influence the criteria could be, for example, limiting the maximum amount of people allowed to enter, or raise the alcohol price, or, for example, improve the isolation of the house. However, one can immediately see that the first two alternatives will negatively influence the amount of satisfied guests at the party, while this was the most important criterion for Koen. Therefore, of these three alternatives, it would be best for Koen to isolate the house very well, the third alternative. Because this would not spoil the experience of the friends, but would prevent negative consequences for the neighbors. In the previous case, Koen just considered the first three alternatives that came to mind, but the chances are high that he did not think of all possibilities. Something that is also often overseen is the so-called zero option. Often we are so keen on finding an alternative that we forget to consider the consequences of doing nothing at all. Maybe whatever party Koen organizes, it will cause so much nuisance to the neighbors that they will call the police and Koen will ruin his relationship with the neighbors forever. Maybe in that case it would have been better for all parties that the party would never have been organized at all. In order not to oversee any important alternatives, it's always better to look at the problem in a group setting. Everyone in the group will have a different expertise or viewpoint on the problem, and therefore the chances is larger to end up with the extensive list of both very realistic and some out-of-the-box ideas. Several methods exist for productive group sessions for the generation of alternatives, like brainstorming, brainwriting, brain sketching or mind mapping. All these methods have in common that no one initially judges the alternatives that come up, because this will block the creative process. Another method to both generate and categorize alternatives is the creation of a means-ends diagram. But first remember the goal tree we learned to construct earlier in this course. The means-end tree is a similar technique, only instead of deconstructing the goal into further sub-goals, we now apply an approach to structure all means to reach the main goal. In one of the previous videos we showed you how to make a goal tree for the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the case of the Groningen gas. Their main goal in that case was a sustainable energy supply. When creating a means-ends diagram, the first step is to make an action out of the main goal of the actor. In this case, the main goal becomes to supply sustainable energy. To get to the next level of this diagram, we have to ask the question how. So, how can the ministry supply sustainable energy? This is easy to answer, as we already have made the goal tree in the past. And the second level of this original goal tree can be reformulated into actions. These actions then are used for the second level of the means-end diagram. By asking the how question again for the second layer of means, we can think of several sub-means to achieve these actions. Some of these means might have come from previous brainstorm sessions. As you categorize the means, you might come up with new ideas or find out that one of the categories is underrepresented. This could be the result of a means-ends diagram in the case of sustainable energy supply. Once you have created such a means-ends diagram, you can select some of the means and group them to create interesting alternatives. In a later stage, you will learn how to judge alternatives and help the client to decide on what to implement.
Now, before you start working on your own case, study section 2.5 in your book. After that, design a problem diagram for your case. Make sure everything is in there. Start from the actors, their criteria and your causal diagram. Identify the external factors and also show how the alternatives influence at least one factor in the diagram. When your diagram is finished, how exactly are you going to use this in your communication with your client? Finally, a few pitfalls when making problem diagrams. In a problem diagram, it is essential that you combine all analyses that you've carried out so far. When all analyses so far are carried out correctly, they fit nicely. Then it is not so difficult to make a good problem diagram. often you see the different analyses do not fit so well. Most common is that the criteria in the problem diagram do not stem from the goal trees made earlier in the process. And the same happens with the alternatives. These should stem from your brainstorm sessions, your analytical sessions with your causal diagram, or your creative sessions. You have screened your initial list of alternatives, and now a few combinations of alternatives are left. These are now in your problem diagram, aren't they? An alternative that often misses is the so-called zero alternative. Doing nothing in a situation sounds like a crazy solution, but can sometimes be better than actually doing something. And even when it's clear that doing nothing is no serious option, still it is very useful to have some sort of reference. What happens when I don't do anything? And what will be different when I do implement an alternative? Using this diagram, you can now talk to your client more elaborately about the problem. Good luck with your meeting.